Hi everyone. In this video you're going to watch me construct a beautiful teardrop shaped pair of earrings. And the earrings will incorporate a crystal that, although the crystal is free to move, see how it moves? It'll remain suspended at a precise point above the bottom of the earring. Let's take a closer look at the earrings. Looking closely at the earrings reveals beautiful curvilinear dewdrop or teardrop shapes upon which the crystals are suspended. In other words, they float sort of at midpoint, but their movement is stopped at a certain point that I establish by flaring the bottom part of the earring. The tools that I use to create these earrings are standard chain link pliers, pair of round nose pliers, a pair of side cutters. I also used a pair of flat nose pliers and bail making pliers, and you'll see me in the video using curved nose pliers to form the top spirals. I also flatten the metal using a chasing hammer on a steel block. I form the coils which hold everything in place with my homemade coil making tool. The earrings are formed out of 20 gauge nickel silver wire dead soft round. I used Swarovski crystal in the earrings that you're going to watch me make in the video. Instead of a ruler, I always use a self-healing cutting board with ruler gradations to measure out my wire. Pair of protective eye goggles. The first step in creating these beautifully distinctive looking earrings is to measure out the wire. And for this demo, I'm going to stick with my standard nickel silver wire. This is the wire I use to demonstrate with in class. And to make the teardrop shape, we need to use 6-inch lengths of wire. So I'll put this on the side. And as you already know, I like to measure out my wire on a self-healing cutting board. It just lets me lay the wire down nice and flat and get a reasonably exact measurement. At the 6-inch point, I'll cut a length and measure my second length. Good. So we have two 6-inch lengths of wire. Before I continue with the forming of the teardrop shape, I'm going to create the two hanging units that we see. It's important to make this first because it's the coil on this hanging unit that will hold the teardrop shape and allow it to be formed. To make this, I'll use my handmade coil making tool. And here's what you do. I drilled a little hole in the coil making tool. You see I have two here. This one is closer. I'm going to use the closer one. I insert my wire, which happens to be 20 gauge nickel silver wire in this case, into the hole, and I lock it in place with a toothpick. And I press down a bit, so that the toothpick literally wedges the wire in place. Then I begin to form the coil. And I like to do it 3 wraps around. Having done that, I take that little piece of dowel and I press down. Of course, I could also do that with my chain link pliers. Next is to trim off the wire. And then I continue with my chain link, or in this case I'll use my flat nose, to press down the end of the wire. Because the wire has a tendency, when you trim it, to stick out a bit. And this action here assures that everything is going to lay nice and flat. You're going to have a beautiful coil. Having formed the first coil, let's remove it from the tool. And we'll make another coil. Notice the coil has a stem that goes up. That stem will eventually be formed into the top loop. Having made the two coils that will hold everything in place, now I have to make the top loops. Let's measure this one to see how long that unit is from the bottom of the coil to the top of the loop. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5/8 in length. And it looks like what I did is I bent the wire out at the 1/2 inch mark to create that top loop. And that's what we'll do here. I'll position the bottom of the coil against that rule of gradation right there. Then position my round nose pliers at the 1/2 inch mark. And I'll bend the wire out at a 45-degree angle. See what I did? You know why I'm doing this. To center the loop that I'm about to make. Now, having bent the wire out at a 45-degree angle, I bend my wire around the round nose pliers to create my top loop. Okay? There we have it. Now I hold the top loop in place with a pair of flat nose pliers, and with my other pair of pliers, I grab the tip of the wire I went 3 times around. That gives us a nice looking top coil. Now take my side cutters and I'll press it firmly against that wire that sticks out, and I'll cut it off. And I'm holding on to that little piece so it doesn't go flying across the room and hit somebody. I'm also wearing goggles. Now, inevitably, the wire sticks out a little bit. I always take my flat nose and work it down. Then I put it back on the coil making tool to line up the loop. This assures that it falls straight, and we want that. I have a beautiful little unit made, and I like the way the coils complement one another. The ear wires will eventually be attached to these hanging units, and the hanging unit will hold the bottom part of the earring in place. So the next step now is to begin to form the teardrop. Holding the ends of my wire, I carefully begin to bend it, to curve it, maybe that's a better word, and form that bottom curve of the teardrop. Let me put that down and begin to introduce that to the other piece. To reinforce the curve of the bottom loop, I use my bail making pliers, and I use the wide jaw of the plier. Of course, if you're making a smaller pair of earrings, you could always go with the smaller jaw, or this would be a lot of fun. It gives you multiple possibilities. This is a multi-size looping pliers. What do I like to do? I like to hold the wire firmly with my bail making pliers, and then with an additional pair of pliers, I pull the wire. And that locks the curve in place, precisely shaped to the wide jaw of the Lucum plier. Do it again. Good. The next thing that needs to be done before positioning the wires that have been formed into the teardrop shape onto the hanging unit is to place the crystals. And since I used the blue there, I think I'm going to go with a nice light shade of green for this pair of earrings. That's nice. Slide the crystal in place. And I'm still not ready to do any of the flaring. That comes later. The flaring actually is achieved by forging it on a steel block. That also gives a nice look to the teardrop shape. But what do we do next? Next, I place the top hanging unit onto the wire that'll form the teardrop. So we got one in place. Two. Beautiful. The next step is to form the spirals. Before we do that, what I'm going to do is gently flatten the tip of the wire right there. That action will enable us to grab the wire more easily with round nose pliers. I'm going to begin the spiral shape with that nice round form created by using the round nose pliers. Let's do that on the other pair. Good. Using the round nose pliers, I grab the tip of my wire and I create a circle at the narrowest part of the plier. See that? Okay, we do the same here. Well, I'm off to a good start. Let's lay it down to get better contrast. So what I need to point out at this stage is as the wire enters the hanging unit, it crisscrosses. And this length shoots out onto that side, and this length shoots out onto that side. That's the natural way the wire wants to go. And I always spiral out. So the round form, the spiral form, is facing the outside. See how we have that? Let's do that again. Using the very tip of my round nose pliers, I create a tiny circle. That'll become the spiral. Let me go to the other side, and I create the tiny circle. Good. Then I make sure those circles are facing the right direction. It's easy to correct them at that stage. I like to use curved nose pliers to create the spiral shapes, because it allows me to see what I'm doing a little bit better than if I was to use these chain link pliers. Although you can use your chain link pliers if you don't have curved nose. But I recommend you get yourself a pair of curved nose. Very useful. Make the job a little easier. Okay. Let's repeat that. How many times around? I went once, twice, and the end of the wire there is facing out and in the middle. So I could do the same thing with this side. Yeah, okay, that looks good. hammer-created spirals that are reasonably close inside. There's a little variation going on here, but that never bothers me. I'm going to repeat what I just did here on this half. And it's important to make sure you wind them so not necessarily those are exact, but the bottom teardrop shape is exact. In other words, I want this and this to be mirror images of one another. That's what would be noticed. If these were different sizes, the earrings wouldn't match up nicely. At this stage of development, I need to introduce the Flair. That's going to not only refine the look of the teardrop shapes that I've created here, but also help position the crystal at the point that I want. And it's just about a little less than mid-center. Using my chasing hammer and the steel block, I start to tap the wire gently. Don't go crazy. You don't want to accidentally hit that crystal. I'm tapping the metal on both sides right now, just to allow the spring-like tension that I'm creating by tapping it, because I'm expanding the metal a little bit, and it's actually adjusting the curve. Also, that action is work hardening the metal, and that's something that I like. It's making this a much stiffer shape. Good. The gentle tapping actually evened out a little bit of a wobble that I had right there. Now it's gone. Next, I want to flare out the metal. I don't want this side to flare out. I just want this side to flare a bit. Okay, let's check, see what we have here. Not bad. I could actually leave it right there. Put that aside. Same thing. Very carefully tapping both sides to create a little spring-like action that's going to correct the shape. Now I'll begin to flare out the bottom. And this is where I have to check it, because now that we've established where this hangs here, I don't want to over flare it and have this hang higher. I want to see if I can get these to match up. And we're already getting close. So, a little bit more. Check it again. Not there yet. Reasonably good. It's also important to make sure the hanging units are on the back side. In other words, the angle that loops out from the coil is positioned on the rear side of the earring. This is the side that will face your head. The next step is to make the ear wire that we have here. Now, I'm not going to demonstrate in this video how to make the ear wire. I do have a video out on how to make your own ear wire that looks sort of like this, and I recommend you watch it. Or, of course, you could always use store-bought, pre-made ear wires. The one thing to keep in mind with the ear wire is when you do make your own ear wires, use sterling silver wire only, or gold. Anything else can react with the ears. I made 2 new ear wires, and now I'll attach these. What I always do is I integrate my ear wire into the piece with a permanent wrap. This guarantees that the ear wire and the earring is not going to separate. So I make sure I position it right, and I did. The ear wire faces towards the head, and the earring faces out. Beautiful. Grab that little loop with a pair of curved nose pliers. Then with a second pair of pliers, I wrap the long length around the ear wire to form a tight coil that's not going anywhere. So I went around 1.5 times. Trim off the excess. with sharp side cutters. Next, using a pair of flat nose, I work down that little piece that sticks up. And I compress, making sure I have a beautifully tight coil. One half of the pair completely finished. Let's go to the other half. There we have them. They're complete. A beautiful pair of teardrop-shaped dangling earrings with floating crystals. And I've attached both ear wires. Had lots of fun making this video. Hope you enjoyed watching it.